Okay, I think we're on. There we go. Okay, thank you for joining us for our first ever annual, well, it will become annual, Housing Element Workshop. And I wanted to introduce myself and also the city team. So I'm Kathleen Mallory. I'm the Planning and Sustainability Manager. And I have to my left Emilio Ramirez, who's the Housing Director. Also in the audience, I have Elsa Brown with the city's Housing and Economic Development Department. Elsa's the Development Manager in the city's Economic Development and Affordable Housing and Rehabilitation Division. That's a mouthful. And then I also have Jasmine Kim. She's the city's principal planner with the Long Range Planning and Sustainability team. And then we also have Ashley Barden, our sustainability analyst. We thought we'd just get the whole gang here, and we're definitely a little out of practice of doing a real live presentation, but we will start rolling here this evening. So you can bring up the presentation, Diego. Thank you. All right, so the purpose of this evening's meeting is to look at the progress in meeting our housing element objectives, and also to go over some of the programs and what's coming up in the coming year. This is known as a hybrid meeting. We really did want to have engagement in multiple languages, so we have interpretation is available. We have Lourdes and her team available, and that will be for both in-person as well as virtual call-ins. So if you wish to speak and you're in the audience, if you can please complete a speaker card at the front, and if you need interpretation, there's a box for you to check, and then hand it over to Kristen. I didn't introduce Kristen. This is Kristen Guzman. She's with the division, and if you can give her that card, then she can bring up Lourdes and her team if you need interpretation. What we'll be doing is this is just like council and planning commission meetings. To call in speaking remotely during the meeting, follow those instructions. That is also on the flyer that was emailed to a number of you. We would like you to press *9 to raise your hand, and when you're then put into the speaker queue, Kristen will be in charge of that. And when she calls your number or your name, you'll press *6 to unmute. We are intending to take in-person public comments first, and then followed by virtual public comments. I did hit on this just a moment ago very briefly. We did the introductions. I did identify the purpose of this meeting, and it's one of our programs. It's program 41 in the housing element. And this is a new program that the state wanted us to implement, to have a community meeting on the progress of our housing element implementation. We did do much of that in what we presented to council on the 19th. It was a status report of how we're doing in meeting our housing element numbers, as well as a status of the general plan implementation. But this presentation goes a little bit further. It speaks to upcoming housing programs that budget dependent we're hoping to implement, and then it also seeks to gain input from those that are participating on issues or opportunities or input on specific programs that we'll be talking about tonight and which we are hoping to implement next year. And I want you to think of this as not just a one and done. This is an open dialogue. When after we complete this meeting, if you want to call me, Emilio, if you have specifics that you'd like to go over regarding programs, feel free to reach out to either one of us. So we'll talk about the status in constructing the units, the status in terms of our accessory dwelling unit construction, and then also how those relate to meeting our regional housing needs assessment number. And then so I'll go through those items, and then we'll turn it over to Emilio, who will talk about housing department programs. And then we'll talk also about some ordinance changes which we implemented this year in the method to help support housing. So this is, you probably, folks on the phone or on the Zoom as well as in person are probably very familiar with this. This is if the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development defines affordable levels in May each year, and this identifies in Ventura County that for a family of 4 or 4 persons in a home, the 2023 median income is $123,500. You can see that sliding scale by person, and that is a number that is changing, as I mentioned, every May. It is, so that the number speaks for itself. In terms of how we're doing with our regional housing needs assessment, the state established a goal of the city facilitating construction of 8,549 dwelling units between 2021 and 2029. In 2023, 641 units were issued building permits, and approximately 40% of those units were in 2023 met the criteria of placement in the lower income and moderate income household category, while the remaining 60% were categorized as dwellings affordable to above moderate income households. So we're doing pretty good in constructing our units, and the following slides will show a little more specifics about that. Planning entitlements were granted for 254 residential units, so that's different, planning entitlements versus building permits, just to make that clarification. So 254 residential units in 2023. Accessory dwelling units made up 73 of these units, with the remaining units resulting from multifamily development, as well as 2 single-family subdivisions and 2 single-family developments. Building permits were issued, as I mentioned, for 641 residential units, and of those, 333 were located within the River Park specific plan. The remainder of the units were located throughout the city and included multifamily units, single-family dwellings, and accessory dwelling units. And in the 2023 year, certificates of occupancy were issued for a total of 372 dwelling units. We're doing very well in constructing our accessory dwelling units. And in 2023, 87 accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, received planning permit approvals. 178 were issued a building permit, and 67 units were constructed and occupied. The housing element projects that we will build 283 ADUs during our roughly 8-year planning cycle. So you can see we're doing a really good job in meeting that number. And also, as a result of the city's update to the accessory dwelling unit ordinance and ongoing city promotion of the ADU program, the planning department entitled 425 ADUs in 2022, 2023, and 253 ADUs were issued building permits during that same 2-year time frame. The city is on track in meeting that housing element unit projection, that 283 number that HCD stipulated, and we envision that we'll be on track to meet that as early as 2024. And we do envision that we can significantly exceed that projection by the end of the housing element cycle, which is October 15th, 2029. Just to summarize then, in 2023, 641 units were constructed, of which 50% were in the area, 50% were the very low income category. Actually, I don't have that right. Very low income units, we constructed 38 units. Low income, we constructed 173. And in the moderate income category, 46 units, and above mod, 384 units. Right now then, Amelia will cover the programs that the Housing Division has been working on in 2023.
Good afternoon. My name is Emilio Ramirez. I'm Director of Housing for the City of Oxnard. The city in partnership with all of the departments and the county, nonprofits, development community, a myriad of other players that are working with the city to help complete its goals. Not only because Reno says so, but because it's what's right and what we do. So first, a homeownership assistance program. We did long-term have a homeownership or down payment assistance program within the department. Because of the cost of housing, the cost of a single-family home in Oxnard, it wasn't able to produce many loans, not for lack of demand, but really for lack of cash. What we did was we contracted with Ventura County Community Development Corporation for them to operate the city's program. Still operating the same level, same loans, except that we are not expending staff resources and salary for that operation of that program. The Casa de Carmen project, here referred to as shelter development, is under construction. You may see it at the corner of 2nd and B, a block away. The construction is active. It includes a mixed-use development that has a navigation center or an overnight shelter on the ground floor. That overnight shelter includes 110 beds, and it is a site of the relocation of the K Street shelter once this is complete. Top that has 56 units of housing supported by project-based vouchers and in the form of permanent supportive housing for previously or otherwise homeless persons. Right now, we're expecting that we will have a occupancy permit around January of 2025 for the housing units, and then be able to complete the tenant improvements on the ground for the navigation center and hopefully be under in occupancy within the first half of 2025. The Surplus Land Act, the state has amended the Surplus Land Act a couple of years ago, and again in last year and took effect this year. We are in process of disposing of several properties that the city owns, largely in downtown, but some outside of downtown. Some for the purposes of affordable housing, but some for the purposes of but market rate housing, wherein they would comply with the requirements of the Surplus Land Act and the requirements of the inclusionary ordinance, which I'll talk about in a little bit. There is quite a bit of property that is part of the disposition process of the Surplus Land Act. I'm happy to answer questions specifically, but there are quite a few. Pro-housing designation, honestly, it's a fairly simple process that we undertook for a designation that the state of California is offering for cities that are pursuing additional housing resources to meet the demand in California. The city council did adopt the request to apply for a pro-housing designation, and we have submitted it to the state and are pending that designation from the state. We do qualify, so we expect that we will be so designated. Back to you.
So on this slide, we wanted to identify programs and actions from the housing element that we'll be talking about in this presentation. And then Emilio and I will tag team a few of them, and then also Ashley Barden, our sustainability analyst, will talk about Program 20. So on this slide, one of the programs in the housing element that the state was very specific about was identifying a code compliance program where we would conduct a targeted windows survey to visually look at the exterior, only the exterior, of certain areas identified by the city, looking at the conditions of the outside, roof, windows, siding, and categorizing the units in terms of how much repair they need. That information would then be used to potentially develop a housing rehab program, funding dependent, of course. And that's one of the programs that we envision initiating next fiscal year. And one of the questions will be, do you have suggestions on areas within the community? This is a program that would kick off as identified in the slide at fiscal year 24-25. And there would be potential measures to address the needs. And so we wanted to put that on the table here to let you know we have that as part of our plan. Again, this is something that would initiate next year, and it's dependent upon resources. It is identified as a code compliance program in being assisted through code, and obviously that is something that is council and dependent as well. So Program 7 pertains to housing permitting, and the city has done a lot of work to improve the processes of moving projects through expeditiously, from our Coordinated Development Advisory Committee process, which is a representative from Public Works, Housing, Planning, and those groups meet to comprehensively and cohesively review development projects so that input is received early on in reviewing projects. So that's been successful. And what I'm doing here in identifying that is sort of laying the foundation, and then the goal is, are there other suggestions that this group may have? Obviously, we know, make everything ministerial, streamline where you can. We certainly have with our ordinance updates that I'll talk about in a moment. But we also have, and I didn't know if the overall folks on the call as well as in the audience are aware that we have also conducted one of the largest investments in software for the Community Development Department, and council authorized an enterprise software platform, which will really help, we believe, in moving through submittals and plans equal cost, as well as review processes being a little more expeditious through that review process. So, and I wanted to make sure you're aware of that, and then maybe there's some programs that you're aware of. We do try to keep our finger on the pulse, but if there are other processes for streamlining or expediting review, we'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. This program is Program 9, and it's a farm worker housing program brochure. And we have been working with the county's farm worker housing program where they're conducting a survey, and we're hopeful that that information can go into a survey, can go into a brochure, that survey information. We have also reached out to house farm worker groups as well as the state in terms of their farm worker program. And the goal in this brochure is to identify where farm worker housing can be located, any funding opportunities that might help to facilitate farm worker housing, and then to produce an example brochure. You may remember that as part of our housing element, we put on our website the face of affordable housing and what that looks like. We've had lots of hits on that, and we were happy to do something similar, which is what are some opportunities for farm worker housing? And we're looking at that brochure as a similar type of promotion of housing for a specific segment of our community. Amelia, do you want to talk about the inclusionary program?
Dying to talk about inclusionary housing. As some of you may know, the city has been undertaking a redraft of the inclusionary housing ordinance for a couple of years. Right now we are pending a decision by the Attorney General's office, or an opinion by the Attorney General's office relative to the interplay between a local inclusionary housing ordinance and the density bonus law. We're trying to ensure that we are able to maximize the required number of affordable units that are built out when the inclusionary ordinance and the density bonus law intersect. Our traditional ordinance requires that when a development has at least 10 units, that 10% of those units be affordable, amongst a myriad of other conditions. Right now, we are proposing to increase that requirement to 15%, and that they be as deep as very low income to potentially as high as moderate income. I don't know when to expect a response from the Attorney General. We have been asking and we're just waiting. But as soon as we do hear an answer from the state elected officials or the Attorney General's office, we will make sure that we report back to everybody and bring forth the ordinance to its final adoption.
Hello, my name is Ashley Barden. I'm the Sustainability Analyst with the City of Oxnard. I'm going to talk about Program 20, Energy Conservation. So this is an initiative in the housing element that encourages development of market rate and affordable housing units to utilize energy-saving features. So we wanted to kind of open up the dialogue today to you guys in here and online to discuss any programs that could to discuss what you need from programs that could incentivize energy-saving retrofits in new construction or existing developments. So we do there are programs out there. We want to hear from you though. If you are interested in reducing your building's energy bills or residents in unit energy bills, there are programs, and you can reach out to me. My email is ashleybarden@oxnard.org. My number is 805-276-3349. Again, also you can drop some questions or responses in the chat. I will be here after the meeting to discuss any other programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. We do get questions about energy conservation opportunities. I've individually reached out to a few of you, and this is a great forum. Really, again, the focus is on Program 20, but we thought, why not? We have been getting a number of calls from investor-owned utilities, including the Clean Power Alliance and SCE, to talk about what is needed in the multifamily market for existing housing. So again, we really are excited about this opportunity. The timing was great. And as Ashley mentioned, she's solely loves this and dedicated to it. So please reach out after this meeting too if something should pop up in your brain on that. One other housing program, 38, is an institutional land use and housing opportunity program. We put that into our housing element as a program before SB4 came out. And that is, SB4 is in establishing a by right CEQA exempt process for approving multifamily housing projects located on land owned by religious organizations and higher education institutions. So we're intending to look at where that makes sense. Again, this would be property owner dependent. And the religious organizations or higher education institutions in Oxnard could consider where they would like to have housing on their property. There are certain limits, and we're still investigating what those are in terms of the process. But from a big picture, it's more, what is the thoughts in terms of that program? Are there some specific examples that you're aware of in other communities that are doing this? That, again, we really do lean on looking at what's happening throughout California, even outside California, actually. So we're interested in hearing your thoughts regarding that program. So again, these are a series of questions. Are there any comments regarding the housing element progress? We will be submitting our report to the state by the deadline. We've already presented that to council. That went March 19th. And the deadline is April 1st, if I didn't say that. So we will meet that deadline to submit the annual report. But also, are you aware of resources, financial or examples, as I've mentioned before, to help implement some of the programs? And do you have some suggestions? And then as issues come up and folks may want to ask questions, we can help prompt some of the questions. For example, Program 1, that code compliance and investigation of the exterior of housing. Do you have ideas on survey areas? So that's, as questions come up, we'll ask some follow-up questions to try to glean some input from the group. As mentioned, we would like to take in-person comments first and followed by virtual questions or comments. And for the interest of making sure everyone has the opportunity to speak, we won't set a time limit, but we do want to make sure we hear from everybody. For the folks that walked in late, if you need interpretation, we do have Lourdes and her awesome team here. We also have that available for folks online. You would just need to check the box if you need that in person, and then virtually, once you raise your hand and are unmuted, you would indicate you need translation, and Lourdes and her team are available, and we have the ability to hear what you're saying simultaneously. She'll translate in the headset. So with that, feel free to submit a speaker card, or it is being recorded, so it is important that we have your questions at the mic.
For our first speaker, we have Maria Navarro.
Hello. So first of all, thank you for working on this presentation. It's really exciting to have a annual workshop that I don't think we usually do in other cities. I just was taking notes a little bit, and I have a couple of questions. So regarding the program, the ADU statistics, I noticed that a lot of the kind of a lot of the numbers came in 2020, 2021, and 2022, and I was wondering, in 2023 there was like a little bit less. I was wondering if that was because of the interest rates going up, and because there was that period where people could take out loans at a very low interest. Maybe they used that opportunity to go ahead and build housing. So I'm wondering if, I don't know, just interested to see how that trend continues in the future. For program 1 on Windows, I was wondering if this was going to be public data. I'm not sure about any areas of the community specifically where you might want to start, but probably the oldest areas makes more sense. And is there a way that program 20 with the energy conservation relates to program 1? Because how do you, if you classify some of these things as needing improvement, it'd be good to see the city also provide some type of incentive or some type of program that would then help them make those structural changes into their homes. regarding program 7. That's really cool. I think I've whenever I go to the building kind of thing right here, I always get people like saying, "Oh my God, why do we have to go to Oxnard to do this still in person?" Whereas other cities already have kind of like some software. So really good that y'all bought a software. And I was wondering if enterprise software, that platform, if it's the standard across the cities or if we're one of the only ones who have it. And then, yeah, that's for the program. Actually, for program 20, I was wondering too if it went along with the Equitable Building Decarbonization Community Program. I think that's coming up in the state with the CEC, and that's going to bring a lot of funds for people who are applying to that program. So maybe just how does that connect? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. For our next speaker, we have Barbara Masai Ortiz.
Good afternoon. It's Barbara Macri Ortiz. That's okay. And I hope we're going to be able to get a copy of the presentation. There was some stuff that was really helpful. So just a few questions that I had just listening to it. On the code compliance one with this survey, the windshield survey, whether that is going to be focused on single family or more multi-housing or just going through neighborhoods. There'll probably be different issues at different ones. I have a bit of a problem in terms of, your windshield survey doesn't really reveal a whole lot in terms of the condition of the housing. And I think that was one of the issues they were saying, they're trying to look to see how much rehab we really need. And this, I guess, is an indicator, but it isn't really a fair, to answer the question of whether the housing is in poor shape in terms of the habitability, the living conditions. But I don't know how you approach that. But that is one. I'd be a little concerned about targeting. I think the only targeting that you could really do is by year, in terms of looking at those neighborhoods that were built longer ago. And I don't think that would be too hard to dig that information up. But that's if you were going to do any targeting, I think that would be just based on historically how Oxnard was built up. On the permitting process, not sure how that would work. I think the other half of the permitting process that is becoming more of a headache is getting your project approved to get to building permit. And we had a big problem because, they put it to consultants because we didn't have enough people. So then you would go with the consultant, then after that was the consultant, then it would be a whole new, another review to get it approved. So it was, in my view, a waste of time. And it ended up taking longer than it would have if we would just had the staff, do the review. Because there was a lot of questions about the, I guess, competence or whatever the people reviewing. And I would say, is that a vetting problem or is it that they interpret our laws different? So those are things that really need to be worked out. But it would have really been nice to have something to be able to look online and try to figure out where the heck we were at. But that was on the other side, after we had the approvals. In terms of inclusionary, of course, we're still holding our breath. And I thought the increase that we were talking about was based on what the Planning Commission said, which was 20%. I thought we had kind of resolved that. Didn't they? Where's the planning commission? Wasn't it 20%? Don't want to put you on the spot. That's my recollection. Well, I don't think it got to city council. Huh?
I was just
Yeah.
asking Kathleen if I should answer or not, but no, there was conversation, obviously, to go to 20%, and for that matter, the breakout of the individual affordabilities were also part of the discussion, but at the end of the day, the consensus that was made was at 15%. And I'm not so sure that we have reached a final decision. I mean, it's still a work in
Okay.
progress, and we're still talking to the state about the density bonus law, and I think that depending on how that ends up shaking out, it may change the allocation.
Because the inclusionary never went to the city council yet, right?
It has not gone to the
Yeah,
city council, right?
okay. All right. On the energy, one thing maybe for Ashley to take a look at, and this is a little bit ancient history now, but we had 150 unit affordable development back in 2000, around there, and I don't know who went through that neighborhood and got everybody, or a lot of the people, on solar. And has made a huge difference to those families. I was just talking with my son, and was approached, there was a door-to-door campaign, and this would have been in Ontario, where they were talking about helping, there's some legislation, I don't know if it was just limited to, more southerly counties, but in terms of providing incentives for the solar with the batteries. And I think now, if we look about solar, we should kind of tack on the batteries, because without the batteries, we're seeing now what the issues are. The biggest problem I have with that is, you get on the solar, but you can't get rid of your Southern Cal Edison bill. And as it is now, I mean, at least mine, the amount I have to pay to SCE as compared to the Clean Power Alliance, it's more. So, I don't know, but when you're trying to make something affordable, it's kind of like we get that big elephant in the room that we can't get rid of, that is really the one charging regardless of what we do with this on this other side. So that's something that I think that has to be figured out for long term, because I know that is one of the complaints I'm seeing from people that I know in this area that got on solar, and they're saying, the bill's not going down, it's because they have to keep paying the Southern Cal Edison. So that's something to really look at and try to figure out how we can address that issue. On the institutional land use and housing, I guess that's program 38, is it just limited to higher education? No, religious, but you said religious and higher institution.
Yeah, that is supposed to be both.
But in terms of, like, if we have a elementary school district that's got extra land, don't they come
It's
within
my
that?
understanding that it's higher education. Yeah, but I mean, this is the law that just came out, so we're still evaluating it. Emilio, you might know more about SB4 than I do.
Well, it's,
Saying that it is not K through 12, so it is post K through 12.
well, it's kind of something maybe we should look at and push them, because you have, not here, not so much in Oxnard, but in Ventura County, you're seeing these school districts getting rid of schools because they're losing students. And then it's a question of what do they do with their land? Seems like they should be part of the equation.
Actually, I take that back. To the extent that a K through 12 district owns land and they are pursuing the development of affordable housing that would be occupied by teachers, then it becomes it becomes an eligible thing. But higher education for actual students versus K-12.
Oh, okay. So we're talking higher education for students who go to those schools, and then for elementary, it's if you have teachers, if you're going to build housing for your teachers. Oh, okay. All righty. Okay, I think that's the questions that came to my mind as we were going through it. And then hopefully we can have dialogue about some of the stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple. I wanted to make sure I've got, so I was, we took notes, and then the question, so I went for Maria and then also Barbara, the Edison program, that was a big push. Well, it's not Edison program, the solar program to promote development of solar. Back in the early 2000s, it was like power purchase agreements, PPAs, and it wasn't necessarily buying them outright. So the structure was you'd still have a reduced bill, but for your home or your facility, but you're still paying into, it's like a lease on your property. So we're not seeing as many we're not seeing as many PPAs, power purchase agreements, for solar now. That is a model that we're not seeing as much of. So the other piece of that is that we are getting a lot of questions regarding the types of incentives that would help make affordable housing more affordable for residents. So we're hearing solar with battery from you. We're also aware of a number of programs through the Clean Power Alliance, who is the city's default energy provider. So you can certainly reach out to Ashley regarding some of those programs, and we are a big proponent of that with the city's climate action and adaptation plan. That's one of the main ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, our GHGs, is the partnership with the Clean Power Alliance, and of course, solar is one piece of that. I wanted to make sure, Maria, that I got your the program 20 that you suggested. What was the name of that program? I want to make sure that we have it down. Okay, no problem. Yeah, it is our understanding that the drop in ADUs did have to do with the financing, to address that question you raised. And then I thought that was a really excellent suggestion in terms of tying the efficiencies to surveys. And yes, we have been looking through our GIS at some of the older housing stock. So. And I don't know if you want me to go up there. Probably. Yeah. Diego will say, come up so we can hear you.
Yeah. All right. So it is the equitable building decarbonization. And from my understanding, it's about, give me a second. It's a pot of money that came into the state. So, sorry, trying to find it in my emails again. But it's about, from my understanding, it's 600 million to provide direct installation of weatherization and electrification upgrades for low-income households. And it's called Equitable Building Decarbonization. So they're doing an info session tomorrow.
Thank you.
And Maria, is this with the CEC? Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just to remind, we'd like to take public comments from the audience first and then turn it over, and then have those that are participating virtually raise their hand. So if you have joined late, would like to ask questions, now's your opportunity. Okay, all right, so we're going to go ahead to the virtual audience now, and the instructions again on that are for you to press star, what's the instructions? Press star 9 to raise your hand, and then Kristen would then call on you in the order that she decides, and press *6 to unmute, but Kristen can take it from here.
Is anyone interested speaking virtually? It looks like we don't have anyone interested at this moment.
All right, well, thank you for that. Well, we are here to answer questions, and we can keep the floor and the mic open for you, or you can, we can put some prompting questions out there. I think we'll do that. In terms of, we've talked about program 1 and survey ideas, and we've received input from those in the audience on that. In terms of program 7, what do you feel are some processes in terms of streamlining in other communities that you feel or that you've seen are beneficial or that have worked well? How do you see them working in Oxnard? Okay, so another question. The program 9 example brochures that we put out to promote farm worker housing. Have you seen brochures in other communities? Have you seen any of those that are working well? We have been reaching out to the state, and they don't have brochures yet. Gabby with House Farm Worker, that group, we reached out and we're having discussions with that organization, and hopefully we can take some of the information from that survey and incorporate that into a brochure. But we'd like to hear from you if you have any ideas in terms of brochures for specifically targeted for farm worker housing.
Or ideas for building farm worker housing. That'd be cool too.
I have ideas. So I think for me, one of the things we try to do at CAUSE when it comes to like giving kind of popular. And so first, I guess my question would be with that program: is it for like identifying areas as to where to build? So is the brochure going to be handed to people who own land, or is it going to be handed to farm workers?
The intent is to identify parcels and then to place it on our website so that whoever has access and would like to know where to build or funding for building, they can take advantage of that resource and then promote it through House Farm Workers or CAUSE or however.
Yeah, no, I think if you're going to promote it, I think, House Farm Workers just does a really good job making brochures and flyers. And then in terms of kind of the where to build, I mean, I think at this point, anywhere where there's land, really. I feel like at this point, it's at that. I mean, if you saw the income numbers, and I think half of Oxnard at least falls into the very low income category. So, I think we are in a need right now, and I think Ventura County has become officially the most unaffordable county in all of California recently. So I think that, projects like the Somis apartments, the ones that are going on in Ventura right now, that don't require USDA funding, I think are better too, just because then undocumented farm workers could go and apply to those as well. That's all I got.
Would be if we looked in the areas just immediately outside of the city and identified where there was infrastructure in terms of water and sewer. And that could be a good possibility for farm worker housing if we can find the right combination of water, sewer, and the zoning that would fit within the county. It wouldn't be something that would necessarily increase the city's numbers if they built it in the county, but the county does have a very functional program and policies and development standards for building, the bigger farm worker complexes. But there's very, very limited areas where that can be built, because you need that combination of infrastructure. Or, what they did in Somas was because they had a big enough project, they were able to do a package treatment plant. But it's very challenging, and it's going to get challenging, probably more challenging with the water. So that would be something that could be very well just looking at where your infrastructure is now and seeing maybe some of it would fit, that there may be an area probably in the east side of Oxnard that could be considered for that.
Question. Why do you say outside of the city? Is that because of farmland available or the Employee Housing Act, or why outside of city limits?
Yeah, not so much the Employee Housing Act, because that's very limited in terms of what you can get out of that. But in terms of under the county's farm worker housing zoning ordinance, the farm worker complexes, and just, the reality is, how much land do we have, there isn't a whole lot out there. And I mean, basically, we've been kind of put to deal with all the real small sites because that's really all we have that is considered for, affordable housing. We don't have a lot of options. If we had, if it was back in the 90s where, the Northeast Community Specific Plan hadn't been formulated yet, or the Northwest, those were big chunks of land that we had. Now, in terms of what land do we have that is in a position that it could be developed,
Do you consider farm worker housing to include housing for a person that is maturing in age and coming out of farm labor?
Well, all the ordinances, and actually even USDA says if, you can house retired or disabled farm workers. And the same is true with the county's ordinance. The county's ordinance is tricky because they've set it up, this is an ag use. And if the ag goes away, they have to dismantle the housing. They can't then turn it over and say, we're going to house, somebody else. But in there also, there is that proviso that disabled and retired farm workers can continue to live there. So that's how we deal with it. And as our population ages out, we will see more retired farm workers that may be, able to take advantage of that kind of housing.
So there's a move occurring in rural development, also Joe Cerna, that is seeking to provide funding for development of housing for whom a family is or is on the verge of no longer being a farm worker. In other words, kind of graduating out of farm labor and into a different industry. And so, for example, building out a multifamily in, say, downtown Oxnard versus a place where it's ag use land, because that potentially causes a person, an 18-year-old kid, to no longer be in farm labor instead of being a different industry. So there's a move in Joe Cerna that's allowing that.
Well, see, and I would oppose that. And I would tell you why. Is because the people at the bottom of the totem pole, the acutely low income, are farm workers. And if you say, oh, okay, yeah, they could stay there as someone who's a college graduate, maybe, we're defeating the purpose of farm worker housing. It's got to be focused on farm worker housing. Now, with respect to farm workers who are aging out of the system and not able to continue working, then I think that's another issue, and those workers should be protected. It's that whole thing before we treated farm workers like implements. They're good until they didn't work anymore, and then we threw them out. That's the history of California and the United States in terms of treating farm workers. So having them allowed to stay, then I think that is at least trying to do a measure of justice to that past. And in fact, some of Cabrillo's developments that were, developed with USDA funds, and you could only be a citizen or a legal resident, and we're having some of these folks age out of the system, they can stay living there. And I think that's just a measure of dignity. But if you say, well, we got this situation, so we should change CERNA to be able to incorporate that situation, we're just taking money away from farm workers who need the housing. CERNA is important. And with respect to Cabrillo's latest development, Dolores Huerta Gardens, that will be the first project in this town where you don't have to have a MICA to qualify. And I think that's huge because we have a huge community now of farm workers who, were not legalized in 1984. And so, the young ones, we still have some supervisors and foremans and some of the older workforce there, but for the majority of the workforce, they've never had an opportunity to legalize. And the way we're going, we probably won't see an opportunity, but we still need to have those fields harvested and tended. And so having a source of farm worker housing that is open is good. Now, and I know Cabrillo is using CERNA money for that. So I would be opposed to saying, well, now we're going to stretch the CERNA that you don't really have to be a farm worker. What's the point?
So, sorry, I always enjoy talking to Barbara.
Huh?
I always like talking to Barbara.
Okay.
Here, hold on. I'm not so sure that I see it the same way, Barbara. There is a concept that maybe stems from Dreamers that is talking about a future of a young farm worker. Where that future doesn't necessarily mean continued farm labor, i.e. potentially housing director of the city of Oxnard. So that idea of a transition from one industry, farm labor, to a different industry, i.e. Dreamer, right? And allowing that to occur for, say, some other industry or vocational aspect of a person that is maybe stuck in farm work or farm labor, and moving to a different industry. I think that's kind of the basis of that point, that objective. I mean, inclusive of a program or a development project that I am trying to think of right now, but I'm not so sure that it is in conflict with the purposes of building affordable farm worker housing, especially for that matter, the objectives of the family that is looking to improve the livelihood of their kids. In other words, I'm not so sure that the parents of farm workers want their kids to grow up to be farm workers.
Right, no, and I mean, there's situations for that, okay? I'm just talking about, we have this limited amount of money. It's all about money. And the more you take away from the most limited, which is the farm workers, to help others, then you don't have that. That's my point. Now, in terms of, I can give you some historical in terms of what's happened in Oxnard. Okay, we did, and this isn't necessarily farm worker housing, but you take Wagon Wheel. Okay, it took us from 2004 to 2014 before those were built. At one point, we did a survey of every family in terms of who needed what, in terms of the size of the unit, the income level and all, so that we were building those 120 units to fit the population. The problem is that it took 10 years after that survey before it was done, and everybody had changed. So what did we end up doing there? We ended up with some of the kids of the tenants who were surveyed getting their own units because we couldn't put them together with their family, because if we put them together with their family where they were living in the trailer together, in the mobile home together, then they would be too high because we had 4 or 5 incomes in the family now. So we had to figure out a way to take care of the folks. And, the issue at Via Victoria, where everybody complains, oh, look at the cars along Victoria, what's going on? The families haven't changed. They've just grown up. They've grown up, so they have a 2-car garage, but they now have 3 kids who are all either working, going to school, or doing other things, still living at home. Why? Because there's no housing for them to go out to. They're living at home. They have to have their car, and so their car's parked along the street. These are kind of like the practical problems that happen when we don't have a viable housing supply. And, we try to get the city to build lower income housing, and the push is on, well, we got to let in the market rate housing. Problem with the market rate housing, we don't take care of any of our youth because nobody can afford it. For one, I have a grandson who's now, and he was doing pretty good. He's like a chef, kind of learning to be a chef. So he moved out of the home, the family house. He's with 4 other young men splitting the rents in one of the, I think he's either a Wagon Wheel or River Park, one of the two. And they're each paying $1,000 a month for their rent. And he's learning, you can't get a car loan. You can't do this. You can't do that because your rent is $1,000. We have failed this generation completely.
Yeah, so there's a few things there, some of which you and I can work on for the rest of our lives.
Yes, and we will.
But here's my question. So if we were to focus for a little bit on Cabrillo's project on Vineyard, there is an extended family, if you will, that is still in that unit, where the family that was in the unit has grown to a scenario where that young adult, former child of a farm worker family,
He's
still a farm worker.
He's an adult child of a farm worker family who that farm worker is either still in the fields, or the only other way he will qualify is if he was disabled.
Okay, so that's or
he was retired.
So that kid is my point. So that young adult who was a farm worker or is part of a farm worker family and is now next generation to that family. That member of that family, in my opinion, still qualifies as a farm worker. They're still struggling with the same goals in their life to accomplish the kind of the success of the next generation, which in large part is a significant objective of that farm worker family. So if we work on an effort such that that young adult has an ability to move to their independent unit where they can pursue a different vocation that offers them a different income stream, a different opportunity, where they're still considered a farm worker because they're from that family. That's what I'm talking about. Therein lies this continuation of potential farm worker housing, right? Where the entire objective of that family was to provide for a better future of their kids, right? And their kids are not necessarily receiving that better future wherein they're overcrowded in this one farm worker unit. So they graduated from that condition and they want to move into their independent unit like everyone else does in an affordable condition, but in a way where they're not, quote, stuck in farm labor for the rest of their lives. They want to move to a different vocation. So that alternate vocation becomes step 2 of the farm worker experience. That therein lies kind of the idea between the kind of the graduation of Joe Cerna and et cetera. What do you think about that?
I have a problem with it
Right, Tim?
because it will either eliminate opportunities in that particular housing. You know, if we say, okay, take Via Victoria, say, okay, so he can get on the list to transfer when there's an open unit, to transfer to his own unit within there, then we're limiting the opportunity of the farm workers who've been on the list for 20
Yeah, but that's not what I'm
years.
suggesting. What I'm suggesting, I'm sorry, what I'm suggesting is that there is the next generation of that farm worker family, and that's that new family that grew out of that original family, right? And that next generation is still in need of housing, right? And they ought not be relegated to an overcrowded condition because of the lack of stock, right? So, wherein they still may consider themselves a farm worker. Maybe they still work in farm labor, but they are now the second generation of immigrants, potentially. And their desire is to have a better income, et cetera, so maybe they want to be now in the new generation, they want to be, I don't know, a mechanic or a teacher, right? And so for as long as they continue this graduation, this maturity into this new vocation, they remain farm worker status. It's that farm worker status that's the condition such that we can build another unit somewhere else for the same farm worker condition because they maintain a farm worker status because they're graduating into the new vocation. That's the change in Joe Cerna. That's what they're considering.
So you're saying if the person is a son or a daughter of a farm worker, that they could bootstrap onto farm worker housing wherever because of the status that they had?
So the eligibility of, say, rural development or some farm worker funding source, the eligibility of that source to build a farm worker dedicated housing such that it is for that child, that family that is graduating from that traditional farm worker larger family and no longer in need of having to be, quote, relegated to the same units for lack of stock. So they maintain their farm worker status until such time that they can graduate into whatever other stable vocation that might be there.
So it's like a transition?
That's kind of the idea behind the potential change in funding eligibility from rural development in 504 and 514 and et cetera, so that they can they can make that transition, especially considering that rural development, as you know, requires documented status. So there's a higher possibility that documented status is viable for that second generation.
Yeah, well, under CERNA, documentary
It does not-
status
not
doesn't
necessary, right.
apply.
But
And
514,
the other, I think we'd have to deal with USDA. And if they're not a farm worker, then I don't think they would be eligible for any of the housing that's
They wouldn't.
USDA.
They wouldn't be now, but that's what we're talking about. That's the conversation that they're having, is that does that,
They're having that with the United States government.
with 504 and 514 and rural development and et cetera, does
That I could go along with. Because you have a limitation of the stock, but you also have a limitation of the clientele. Because, like I said, if you didn't get on the 1984 train to get your immigration in line, you have not had one decent opportunity to do so since then. So you either, for the young people, they're either citizens because they're all born here, or they're in the same thing. Or the DACA people, look at the mess we've done with DACA, It's like, everybody thought, oh, great, this is what's going to happen with DACA, and they've gotten screwed every year,
but yeah, but that's,
But for USDA, I'm all for it.
I mean,
For
you're right.
sure,
The
no,
dreamers,
I'm not.
the dreamers didn't get the promise that they were offered, but that's honestly because of the change in leadership at the White House. But if the dreamers were to maintain their farm worker status despite their new future, then it would make eligibility for that build out of additional affordable housing. Right, and therein lies, I mean,
It's a big if. But yeah, with the federal government, we got plenty of problems that we can sit down and fix. No question about that. Just don't be too generous with the few dollars that there are for good farm worker housing. Thank you.
We do have one question on the call. So Kristen, you want to open up the queue?
Hi, this is Janet with Rent 805.
Hi there, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
One of the questions I had, because she brought up, Ms. Ortiz brought up the conversation about when the farm workers are, aging out. I know that in Camarillo, they have an influx of low income for seniors. It seems as though they're putting a lot of units in Camarillo for that. Is there any way that those folks, because they're also being done by Cabrillo and a couple of the other companies that do work with low income housing, and they work with affordability, would those folks then be able to be transferred over to Camarillo, and then their younger families that are working in the fields could stay in those units? I just don't know how that works out.
hi Janet, it's Emilio.
Emilio?
So your question, a little kind of two parts to your question, but first this. The concept that a farm worker has aged and therefore, I guess, retired from farm labor, and they're no longer working in the field, they maintain their farm worker status. In other words, they continue to qualify to live in that affordable farm worker unit. So to build, in every case, to build affordable senior housing is just more palatable for communities than family. And that retired farm worker who is now a senior age maintains that status. So can they move into a development like that? I think absolutely. It depends on a myriad of other factors, not least of which the availability of stock. But the real question I think that I was having is, what if a person is a farm worker but has exited farm labor, at least in the interim, for a different purpose other than they became older. For example, they are still a farm worker, but they are going to undergraduate school. Happens a lot. You go to undergraduate school, you maintain farm labor status, and when you come home, you're still working in the fields. Does that person maintain farm labor status such that the first year teacher still needs affordable housing, and that first year teacher is the first generation of the farm worker family that is living in that farm worker condition? And that's my question, is that to the extent that graduation into a different vocation is a significant part of the objective, can we consider them to be can we consider them to be still farm workers? I mean, to some extent, I realize that it's a stretch. I'm 53 years old. I haven't worked in the fields for 30 years, but I am that person that is next generation. So along the way, I lost my farm worker status. Not sure when. Sad day, by all means. But in that progression, would I have qualified? Therein lies a question, I think, I hope.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when we're looking at all this, so all the low income housing that's coming through, what is this? How many do we need in order to fulfill those units with farm workers? Do we know what that unit count looks like?
Well, we have Janet, this is Kathleen. We do have the numbers to meet our RENA allocation, but I mean, they can be fulfilled. They don't just have to be filled with farm workers. But we do have that number if you're looking at what that is. All right, is that what you're looking for? Is that number? I think yeah. So 1,840, 1,071. I'll have to do that math real quickly.
Janet, it's about 4,700, but that 4,700 units that are affordable are for a person that is low and very low and et cetera income. It doesn't really designate the source of their income. So if they're a farm worker low income, they would qualify, but we don't know how many of those low income residents are farm workers or from a different source of income.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much.
If you're on the virtual call, if you wanted to raise your hand and ask questions, we encourage you to do so. All right, so nothing in the chat and nothing virtual. Anybody in the audience want to share any questions, any comments regarding some of the programs? It's like, all right, well, we're here and available for you if you'd like to do that. We're here till 7. We can keep it going, or we can do a wrap, whatever. Okay, I see people are anxious here. So, Barbara, you asked the question, will this presentation be available? Yes, we will. This is a recorded meeting. We'll put this presentation on our housing element page. We appreciate the input from the virtual attendees and also those in person. I'm hopeful that you received our email notification. There's a couple faces I don't recognize, and I'm hopeful that you did get the email. If you didn't, and you just heard about it in another way, feel free to jot your name and number down to be receiving email notifications in the front. There is a sign-in sheet so that we can keep you up to date on our housing-related items. Again, going one more time, if you have any questions, we're here, or you want to provide some comments, we're here to answer those or receive your feedback. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your time.